Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and now on TikTok at Hawk Blogger. Live on TikTok this morning as well. I can do that when I don't have guests and when it's going to be me solo and I'm not going to be playing a lot of audio. So appreciate anyone who's joining us over there on TikTok. I had planned this morning to do a fair amount of prep because I wanted to do a show on a few different things. Life intervenes, so my youngest decided it was a day to get sick. After 2 weeks off for winter break, that wasn't enough. Needs to be home today. So I am jumping on real quick to do a show this morning before I go help him for the rest of the day. Take advantage of my second partner in crime, my wife, who will watch him for a little bit while I do the show. So good morning to everybody out there on this Thursday. Seahawks news is pretty quiet right now. And while we have this little lull before what will be the storm of OC offensive coordinator names actually being leaked that we know are going to be interviewed, I wanted to take some time this morning to talk through some of the actual candidates that are, in the rumor mill. I think they all make sense and we'll talk through them. But specifically, I want to tie this to where they might potentially go from a quarterback perspective. So I think people have been talking about these things as disparate, separate decisions. Who's going to be the OC? Are we going to keep DK Metcalf? Are we going to keep Geno Smith? I think all of these things are very tied together. And so what I want to do is take a moment to go through some of the most discussed offensive coordinator candidates. I will not go through every single possible candidate because there are too many to list. But then I will also talk about their potential ties to quarterbacks. And this doesn't necessarily mean that just because they have ties to other quarterbacks that they will jettison Geno Smith. But I'll tell you this, I'm definitely getting some signals that Geno Smith's time in Seattle is certainly not set in stone. And I think it's closer to a 50-50 bet whether or not Geno Smith will be back next year than I would have expected. And we'll see. I'm still gathering information. I'm still paying attention to all the things that I look at. But I do think that there's a real chance that if you take a step back, if you look at John Schneider's past and his history with these types of decisions, there are a fair number of similarities to this year, 2024 season, and 2010. His first year as GM, 2010, they made a bunch of transactions. They moved through a bunch of people. They had, first year with the first coach, and Pete Carroll, his first year there. They had a veteran quarterback in Matt Hasselbeck who had significant ties to the organization. Matt Hasselbeck, I believe, I'm going to go and double check this while I've got it up here. Matt Hasselbeck was 35 in his last year with the Seahawks. Had some injuries that year, had a bit of a down year, but they did go to the playoffs. They did win the division, and they did win a playoff game. And yet, John Schneider and Pete Carroll decided after firing the offensive coordinator, Jeremy Bates, that was a good time to move on. And in fact, Matt Hasselbeck was on with Brock Hewitt and Mike Salk this week and mentioned that John Schneider and Pete Carroll told him, hey, part of the reason we're letting you go is this is as good a time as any when we're changing the offensive coordinator and we can get a fresh start. Well, fast forward to 2024. The Seahawks have a first-time head coach, first year as head coach of the Seahawks. They have a relatively successful year with 10 wins. They have a 34-year-old quarterback who struggled a bit this year and has a big cap number coming up, and you got a decision to make, and they just fired their offensive coordinator. I don't think it's crazy that John Schneider could be thinking about this as the same blueprint as what he did in 2011 when they signed a cheap veteran in Tavares Jackson, RIP, and basically used him as a transitional quarterback to get to his draft pick in 2012. I do believe that there's a lot of aspects of this roster that are set up to really contend in 2026. I know everyone's like, hey, I don't want to wait another year, but I'm just being honest. The offensive line especially, I'm going to assume that they are going to retain, they're going to extend Charles Cross, who's 24 years old. I think they're going to keep Abe Lucas around. I think they're going to feel good about Olu Olutimi, who's, going to be going into his third year. I think you're going to feel good about one of your young guards that you develop, and I think you add a veteran guard. That's my assumption. That group will take a step next year, I believe, but I think they can actually be a strength of the team by 2026. Like, they need a full another year together, I think, working. They could accelerate that, but I think it's a reasonable guess that offensive line will start to really round into shape in 2026. The young defense will have had a full year under Mike Macdonald. I think they'll be a solidly top 10, maybe top 5 unit next year. Maybe they will add another edge rusher to help really amplify the edge rush. And I think what you're going to be looking at is a frisky 2025 Seahawks, but then a fiery, ready to contend 2026 Seahawks, similar to, think about the Detroit Lions, who 2 years ago, 2022, they finished the season by beating the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions finished the season by beating the Green Bay Packers. Aaron Rodgers' last game in Green Bay, that actually helped the Seahawks. That was the reason the Seahawks got into the playoffs that year. And it's 2 full years before they were really a favorite to win the Super Bowl. Obviously, they were contending last year, but the difference between that team in 2022 and this team in 2024 is vast. So let's go through some of these names, some of these OCs, and have some time guessing about who they could potentially bring with them if they chose to do that. First name I'm going to go with is someone who I don't know as much about, and we're going to learn about together. I'm trying to get some folks on the show to help us learn. His name is Adam Stenavich. He is currently the offensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers. Matt LaFleur calls plays for the Packers. And just so everybody's on the same page about how this works, you can request to interview a offensive coordinator for an offensive coordinator job if they don't already have play calling responsibilities. It's literally written into NFL contracts, coaches' contracts, that if you do not have play calling duties on offense or on defense, that you can interview for that position that comes with those responsibilities. So that's a guy that I think technically can be requested for an interview. I think Matt LaFleur is excellent. I think he's an excellent coach, an excellent play caller. And Stenavich is a guy that Griff Sturgeon has had good, C-Mike Spinmove has had a lot of good things to say about. He's heard good things from folks about this guy. And he has, for what it's worth, a background as an offensive line coach. He also has background at University of Michigan. This is before Mike Macdonald's time. It was before Jim Harbaugh's time. But he was a strength and conditioning coach and then a graduate assistant. He was an offensive line coach at Northern Arizona, San Jose State, assistant offensive line coach for the San Francisco 49ers, 2017 and 18. So that was, again, post Jim Harbaugh. He was the Green Bay Packers offensive line coach from 2019 to 20, and the Packers offensive line coach and run game coordinator in 2021. And as of this year, as of 2022, has been the offensive coordinator. Now, part of the reason I think Stenavich is an interesting name is because of his offensive line background. And when you look at the Packers and the picks that they've made on the offensive line. Let's take a look at that. Packers draft history. What you'll find is they've made some of the best offensive line picks in the NFL over the last few years. So he joined in 2019. So let's go back to 2019. Every offensive line position pick they've made since he joined. Elgin Jenkins has been a 2-time Pro Bowler, a 5-year starter. He was drafted in the second round. 2020, they drafted John Runyon Jr., who's been a starter for 4 years, recently signed a big deal with the Giants as a free agent. Jake Hansen, who has not done anything. That was a 6th-round pick. John Runyon was a 6th-round pick, by the way. And then if you go into 2021, they picked Josh Myers as a center, who's been a 3-year starter. They picked Royce Newman as a guard. He has not done much. He has starter for 1 year. Cole Van Lennon in the 6th round, nothing there, so nothing huge, but 6th-round picks I'm not going to think too much about. 2022 draft, Sean Ryan in the 3rd round. That did not seem to work out, but Zach Tom in the 4th round is one of the best offensive linemen in football, has been named to some all-pro teams as a 4th-round pick. Rasheed Walker, an offensive lineman picked in the 7th round, has started for a few years, has been a decent player. And then the past couple years, they took no offensive linemen in 2023. And in 2024, they took Jordan Morgan, who in the 1st round, who was having a good year before he got injured. And then Jacob Monk in the 5th round. Don't know as much about how he's performed this year, but I think there's some interesting aspects of Stenavich that, you know, the Seahawks have struggled to find offensive linemen. And if part of what's worked for the Packers is having Stenavich there to evaluate offensive linemen, he becomes an interesting name. Now, the other thing that I bring up about Stenavich is with his history with the Packers, one of the names that I think from a quarterback perspective that you take a look at is Malik Willis. So Malik Willis is a guy who was traded from the Titans this past year to the Green Bay Packers. He started 3 games for the Packers. The Packers were 2-1 in those games. And, you know, he didn't have a lot of great numbers, I would say. His passer rating was excellent in each game. He was very efficient. But you're talking about a guy that was 12 of 14 for 122 yards and a touchdown, 13 of 19 for 202 yards and a touchdown, 10 of 13, 136 yards, no touchdowns. But he had no interceptions in any of those games. That's why his passer rating was 109.8, 120.9, 126.8. Those are all pretty good numbers. He also brings the ability to run. When he started against the Titans, he had 73 yards on the ground, plus a rushing touchdowns. Against the Colts, he had 41 yards on the ground. So this is a guy that has the ability to move on the ground as well as through the air. And as far as his availability, just double checking this. So we've got the right info. So he will be under contract in 2025, the last year of his rookie deal. He's 25 years old. But you'd have to think that depending on what the Seahawks are, you know, this is a guy that was drafted in the 3rd round. You know, could he be had for maybe Sam Howell? Maybe Sam Howell would be part of a deal if they chose to do that. Sam Howell plus a draft pick could be of something of interest. But I think Malik Willis is not out of the realm of possibilities of somebody that the Seahawks could acquire if that was someone that Stenavich believed in. So we also know that Mike McDonald has seen firsthand the impact of a mobile quarterback in Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. So that could be another piece as well. Now, this does not mean I'm saying I think Malik Willis is the next franchise quarterback for the Seahawks. Again, the point and the topic today is if the Seahawks were to hire this specific offensive coordinator, what types of quarterbacks might be tied to him? And Malik Willis is a guy that he knows personally from his time in Green Bay. So Stenavich is a guy that could potentially bring with him someone like Malik Willis. As far as other guys that Stenavich has had experience with, is it possible that he'd look at Aaron Rodgers? He was there when Aaron Rodgers was there. Is it possible that he would say, yeah, let's bring him back? But like, let's work with him again? I don't like the idea, but I'm telling you, this is a guy who's worked with him. Aaron Rodgers almost certainly will be available. And if Stenavich is interested, that's a guy that he has prior experience with. So again, I'm not saying that's the guy, but I am telling you who are some of the people that he could be connected with as a quarterback. All right. So that's another that I'd bring up. Otherwise, I mean, Sean Clifford was a backup quarterback. I don't think Sean Clifford's a realistic option for who Stenavich would bring, but those are the guys that come up there. So let's keep moving. The next guy on my list, Doug Pederson. Let's talk about Doug Pederson. And if you look at Doug Pederson's career, now, he was the former head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, former head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, just was fired this past week. And I don't think that Trevor Lawrence is coming with him. For what it's worth, you know, I don't think that would be the craziest thing for the Seahawks to try to do, but it's 99.9%. The only reason a OC is going to sign up to be the Jaguars head coach is because they have Trevor Lawrence. So I don't think Trevor Lawrence is going anywhere. I'm saying this because I know that I've seen in the chat and other places, people are like, hey, let's go get Trevor Lawrence. And I'm like, I that might sound good, but I'm not sure it's actually realistic. But who are some of the people that Doug Pederson could be connected with? Well, who was the quarterback in Philadelphia when they won the Super Bowl? Well, technically it was Nick Foles, but I'm here to tell you, the guy that started that year for Doug Pederson was Carson Wentz. And so Carson Wentz is a guy that Doug Pederson has a lot of experience with. And he is with the Denver Broncos. I don't think that he's particularly, I mean, he just played against the Broncos. Sorry, he's with the Chiefs. He just played against the Broncos. Let me get that straight. He's with the Chiefs as a backup. He just played against the Broncos. He played horribly in that game. And, Carson Wentz is still 32. He fits the Tavares Jackson kind of mold of a low ceiling veteran. Is it possible that they could look to bring in a Carson Wentz if Doug Pederson came? I think it is possible. The last time Carson Wentz was a full-time starter was 2021. So it's been a while. That was with the Colts. They went 9-8 that year. Carson Wentz threw for 27 touchdowns and just 7 interceptions. And Carson Wentz is a guy that also has a little bit of mobility to him. I wouldn't say he's a big runner, but he did have 215 yards rushing in 2021. I know these are not names that everyone's going to be excited about, but that's the point of this exercise is to talk through who are the potential connections between these coordinators. If you get a Doug Pederson, who might come with him as the quarterback? So Carson Wentz, I think, is an option, if is a possibility, I should say, if Doug Pederson is the guy. Looking through the rest, I think another guy that could be a possibility that was a backup quarterback for the Jacksonville Jaguars this year is Mac Jones. Mac Jones, former early pick, a guy that started a number of games for the Jaguars this year, and I think could be had depending on what the Seahawks wanted to give up. I think that's certainly a possibility. I'm looking through just to see any other connections for Doug Pederson. So let me go to the Jaguars this year and the last few years just to see if there's anybody else that catches my eye. So you've got CJ Beathard. I don't think that's really a realistic option. Yeah, I think Mac Jones and Carson Wentz are your potential QB connections with Doug Pederson. So again, imagine as we go through each of these names, who you might want to be. I see someone asking about Gardner Minshew. Pederson wasn't there with Minshew, so I don't know that they have that connection. That was before Pederson was there. I'm double checking to see anything else that jumps out, but no. I mean, as far as the more recent places he's been, that would make the most sense. Either Wentz or Mac Jones. I think those are two possibilities. So then let's keep going. Another name that I'm going to throw out there, Mike LaFleur. Mike LaFleur, this is Matt LaFleur's brother. Mike LaFleur was a offensive coordinator for the New York Jets. So what does that mean? Well, I will tell you, you're not going to like some of these things, but I'm going to keep it real. So Mike LaFleur, who is currently the OC for the Los Angeles Rams, and called the game against the Seahawks in Week 18. First, just give you a little bit of background for him. He was an assistant for the Falcons in 2015 and 16. So this was when Kyle Shanahan was the OC there and Dan Quinn was the head coach. So he got some experience there. He went with Shanahan to the 49ers in 2017. He was the passing game coordinator as well as the wide receivers coach from 2017 until 2020. So we'll talk about that. I think there's some potential interesting things there. I will go there in a second. And then in 2021, he got his chance to be the OC of the New York Jets at age 34. Did that for 2 years under Robert Saleh. So this is when Robert Saleh went to the Jets as from the 49ers. He brought LaFleur with him. And then after that didn't work out, he went to the Rams under McVay as an offensive coordinator without play calling responsibilities, 2023. So he's been there for 2 years. So first, let's go through his 49er background, because I think that's potentially interesting. Who was the quarterback in 2017 for the 49ers? Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo was the quarterback for the 49ers in 2017. Would potentially Mike LaFleur want to reunite with Jimmy Garoppolo for a season? And if I look at Jimmy Garoppolo, he signed a 1-year deal. He's 33 years old. He will be 34 next year. So he's a 1 year younger than Geno Smith. And he'll be an unrestricted free agent. So that's a possibility if Mike LaFleur's here. If I'm being honest, I'm not a Jimmy Garoppolo guy. I'm not a fan. I think I much prefer Geno Smith as a quarterback. But as far as a 1-year bridge guy, if you're really looking at getting a rookie quarterback, a young quarterback in 2026, you could do worse. You could do worse. So Jimmy Garoppolo is one possibility. I'm looking to see, Nick Mullins, CJ Beathard. I just don't think those guys are realistic options. And let me get to 2020 to see anyone there. Yeah. So Jimmy Garoppolo is probably the most logical pick from the 49ers timeframe with Mike LaFleur. Again, Matt LaFleur is the Green Bay Packers head coach. Once we get into the Jets timeframe, this is a name you probably won't love, but I'm going to mention it. Zach Wilson. So Zach Wilson was the QB they picked and worked with in New York. He got traded to the Broncos. You could say Mike LaFleur is like, there's no way in hell I want Zach Wilson on my team. Could be that Mike LaFleur believes he's a good player and never got the right, was never the right fit in New York. So Zach Wilson's a guy that, as far as availability, Zach Wilson's situation with the Broncos this year is his final season. So he will be an unrestricted free agent next year. What I will bring up, whether or not you like the idea or not, I'm just giving you guys information to think about and chew on. Think about what happened with the last few Jets quarterbacks that got jettisoned, no pun intended. And when you look at Sam Darnold, when you look at Geno Smith, they've had career revivals. There's going to be teams that are now looking at these quarterbacks that everyone thought were busts differently than they did before. And so it's like the girlfriend or the woman who thinks that they can fix the guy, right? They're like, I'm going to be the one that fixes him. That usually doesn't work out so well, but it absolutely is going to afflict a number of teams this year because it's a quarterback-starved league, and Zach Wilson had a high pedigree as a top pick. And so somebody's absolutely going to look at him and say, we can fix him. So would that be Mike LaFleur if he came to Seattle? I think that's a possibility. Another guy that he had time with in New York was Joe Flacco. Now, Joe Flacco got time in with the Colts this year, and he still has played pretty well. I mean, I wouldn't say he's 39 years old. He's on a 1-year deal, so he'll be an unrestricted free agent next year. If Mike LaFleur potentially wants to look at that, maybe that's certainly a 1-year kind of option. Who else? I think as we look through Mike LaFleur's time, I think those are the names. Zach Wilson is probably the one that makes the most sense, or Jimmy Garoppolo. I think so. Mike LaFleur could bring those names along with him. Let's keep going. How are you guys holding up? Listening to these names, are you getting excited about any of these? Are you getting nauseous about this possibility? This is what you got to stare in the face when you're talking about making this kind of move. Next guy I wanted to bring up, Mike Kafka. Mike Kafka is a guy that is having head coach interviews right now, and was a guy the Seahawks interviewed for a head coach position last year, and then were blocked from interviewing for the OC position. And when when you see all that smoke around the Seahawks interest, and then you see after a year where they just were awful on offense, and he's getting all these head coaching interviews, that tells you that he's got a really good reputation for whatever reason. Now, he comes from the Andy Reid tree. And so when we look at Mike Kafka, we're going to have to take that into account. And you're going to be interested in some of these names that he could be tied to. All right. So Mike Kafka, just so you know his background, he used to be a quarterback. He came into the league under Andy Reid in 2017 as an offensive quality control coach, then became the quarterbacks coach for a couple years, for 4 years, passing game coordinator in 2020 and 21. He became the offensive coordinator of the Giants in 22. And for the last 3 years, he actually was given assistant head coach title this past year. I think that's what allowed them to block him from interviewing for the OC position for the Seahawks. So if we go back and let's look through his time with the Chiefs, all right? Who did he get exposed to in the Chiefs? Alex Smith, I don't think is coming back anytime soon. So that's not one to think about. I don't think he's going to bring Patrick Mahomes with him. Chad Henne was the backup for a while. I don't think he's coming. Too old and out of the league. Matt Moore, too old and out of the league. So yeah, I don't think that anybody on the Chiefs makes sense as a possibility. So I don't think that any of his Chiefs time will lead to anything. But here we go, folks. I'm going to say it. I hope you're ready for it. Who does he have connection to that might be available? Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones, former top pick, similar to Zach Wilson, could absolutely be in line for interest from a number of teams. He is currently with the Vikings, and he will be an unrestricted free agent next year. He's 27 years old. He was a 6th overall pick, and just a few years ago was given a $40 million contract, a $40 million per year contract. So this is a guy that, depending on how Mike Kafka feels, might feel like, hey, he got a raw deal. And this guy I can work with, I know him, I want him. He could say, oh boy, definitely no. He's going to have the most experience with them, that's for sure. He's also had experience with Tyrod Taylor. Is that a guy that anyone's going to be interested in? Don't know. He's 33 years old. Excuse me, actually, he's older than that. He's, I think, 35 years old now. He's got experience with Tommy DeVito. Any chance he'd try to bring in Tommy DeVito? I don't think so, but I'll just mention that. The last name I'm going to say that he has connection to, if you're not prepared, brace for it, folks. Who has Mike Kafka had experience with this year? Drew Lock. Drew Lock. So Drew Lock is a guy that Mike Kafka has experience with, and we know that John Schneider loves. And so is there a chance that Mike Kafka says, yeah, let's bring him in? I think that's a possibility. I see in chat, people are saying all these people are implied backups. I hope so. No, I'm not saying that, folks. If you missed the beginning of the show, what I'm doing is I'm going through each offensive coordinator and I'm telling you who are some potential quarterbacks that they could decide are bridge quarterbacks if they move on from Geno Smith. Sam Howell's obvious because he's with the team. I'm talking about people who they could bring from the outside because they have prior experience with. I am not advocating. So this is just to keep in mind. I'm not saying these are the things I want to happen. I'm informing all of us. I'm learning with all of us together on the show about relationships drive the business. They always do. And so if you don't think that an offensive coordinator is going to want to potentially bring in a player and coaches that he has familiarity with, I'm here to tell you differently. So this is someone wrote, "Good Lord, this is the opposite of a suicide helpline." That's kind of how I feel as well. I appreciate that comment from Snyder. Yeah, like people that are like, get rid of Geno Smith, this is the reality. Even if you're someone who's like, oh my God, I love Geno Smith, keep Geno Smith. You got to stare this in the face anyway, because the Seahawks may move on. It is a possibility. You might not like it. You might think it's a stupid thing to talk about or to do. If you don't think it's a possibility, I'm here to tell you otherwise. It's absolutely a possibility that they move on. And so let's really explore what that could mean with the connection to these offensive coordinators. So yeah, people could say, oh, we want a rookie QB. We want a young QB. Sure. This is a terrible QB draft. And if they get one and they develop them, fine. Is that person guaranteed to start right away? No. So again, reminder, John Schneider, 2010, had a 35-year-old Matt Hasselbeck. They fired their OC and Jeremy Bates. 2011, they signed Tavares Jackson as a veteran bridge quarterback. And then they went out and got their quarterback the next year, the young one in Russell Wilson. If you don't think that's going through John Schneider's mind, I think you're crazy. And so they're looking at this massive cap hit for Geno Smith, $44 million. And they're figuring out, do we want to extend him? What do we want to do here? He's going to be 35, just like Matt Hasselbeck was 35 when they let him go. It's going through their minds. It 100% is. So again, keep everybody in chat informed. I probably won't keep repeating that, but now you should all be caught up on what we're doing here on the show today. So I think if Mike Kafka gets hired, I think Drew Lock becomes a real possibility, because we know how John Schneider feels about Drew Lock. So I think Daniel Jones maybe less so, but he will be an unrestricted free agent. So these guys will be available to be had without trading anything. So that's who Mike Kafka could potentially bring with him. Let's talk about who's next. Who's next on the potential offensive coordinator list? Let's go and talk about Frank Smith. Frank Smith, who is currently with the Miami Dolphins. He is the offensive coordinator for the Miami Dolphins, but he does not have play calling responsibilities. So he can be interviewed for this position. So who is he connected with? Well, just to give you a little bit about Mike Smith's background, he came into the league back in 2010 as an assistant offensive line coach for the New Orleans Saints. Did that for 5 years. And then in 2015, went to the Bears as a tight ends coach, did that for 3 years, then went to the Raiders as a tight ends coach for 3 years, and then went to the Chargers as the running game coordinator, offensive line coach in 2021 for 1 year. And he's been the Dolphins offensive coordinator for the last 3 years. So with that in mind, let's check out, I think we'll go as far back as the Raiders in 2018, and we will see if there are any quarterback names. Derek Carr. That's an interesting name. And if we look at Derek Carr's contract situation, he is under contract, but there are real questions that people are saying, is he going to take a pay cut? He said, no, I'm not going to take a pay cut. Does that mean that the Saints potentially cut him? I think it's possible that the Saints look to cut him. If they cut him, they will have $50 million in dead cap in 2025. So that seems pretty unlikely. If they were to trade him, they'd have $40 million in dead cap and $11 million that they'd save in cap space. He'd be under contract for 2026 as well, with a $61 million cap number. So I don't know. I just don't know what's going to happen here with Derek Carr. But that's an interesting name for Frank Smith. He does have background. He was with the Raiders for 3 years and obviously knows Derek Carr pretty well. Mike Glennon, I don't think Mike Glennon is an option. He has experience with him, but I don't think that's going to happen. He did have experience with Marcus Mariota. That's another interesting name as we look across. So Mariota was a backup for the Raiders back in 2020. He will be an unrestricted free agent. He's with the Commanders this year. He is 31 years old. And so if we let's look at Marcus Mariota's season. He actually had, I believe, some decent games this year when he was asked to play. So if we look at Marcus Mariota, he had 2 games that he played. One was against the Panthers in October. He went 18 for 23 for 205 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, was sacked once, 132.8 passer rating, also ran for 34 yards. The final game of the season he started was 15 of 18 for 161 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, sacked twice, 141 passer rating, 5 carries for 56 yards and a touchdown. So Marcus Mariota is an interesting name and could be someone that Frank Smith has some background with, as he was with him, overlapped for a year with the Raiders. Mariota, the last time he was a starter of meaningful games was in 2022 with the Falcons. So if we go back in time to 2022, he started a number of games for the Falcons that year. They were, in his starts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 8, I think, in his starts. He threw for 2,219 yards, completed 61% of his passes. Yuck. 7.4 yards per attempt, 15 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 88.2 passer rating. He did rush for 438 yards that year and 4 touchdowns. So Mariota is a name. Frank Smith, I think that's an interesting name to think about. Again, not advocating for these folks. I'm just giving you guys information, all of us information about who these offensive coordinators might bring with them. All right, so that's who he connected with with the Raiders. Let's take a look. His 1 year with the Chargers in 2021 when he worked for Brandon Staley. There, I don't think that there's anybody there that's really of interest. Let's look at the roster there. Hold on. So nobody else started, but Chase Daniel, who's 35. Yeah, I just don't think that there's anyone on the Chargers that year that is of interest. Let's move ahead to the Dolphins. So the Dolphins, Teddy Bridgewater was a backup. Skylar Thompson, which we got firsthand knowledge of watching him this year. Mike White, he got experience with. And then this year, obviously, Tyler Huntley would be another name that you could potentially think about. I would rather not, but those are the names that you could realistically connect with Frank Smith. Of all those names, I think Marcus Mariota is probably the most realistic of someone that will be available, and also somebody that I can stretch my imagination and believe someone saying, all right, yeah, he can get us 80% of Geno Smith for a year, and will muddle through. Like, I can imagine that. So, like it or not, I think that's a realistic possibility. Let's talk about some other names. Let's talk about one of my favorites, Josh McCown. Josh McCown is currently working for where is he as a coach? Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing here. So Josh McCown is working for the Vikings. Sorry, it's taking me so long to say that, but yes, that's where he's working. He is a really interesting. He's a really interesting prospect for a lot of reasons. I'm trying to see if I can get the same list of coaching background with him, but for whatever reason, they don't want to give it to me. All right, never mind. I will look other places. So Josh McCown was a quarterback's coach for the Carolina Panthers in 2023 under Dave Canales. And I think that's an interesting connection, as obviously John Schneider knows Canales well, and Canales would be able to speak to McCown. And now is the quarterback's coach for the Vikings. Well, McCown's getting interview requests all over the place, and I just think is a very interesting name. I really, really respected him as a quarterback. I tend to like offensive coordinators who have quarterback backgrounds. Being able to really get into the mind of a quarterback is so important. And so if we look at his connections, I mean, we almost have to look at him as a player, not just as a coach. So we'll do the coach stuff first. If you look at the Carolina Panthers last year, obviously you get Bryce Young, who's not going to be made available, and you get Andy Dalton. Is there a chance that Andy Dalton is a name that they would look at? Maybe. I personally don't think so. And then with the Vikings this year, this is again, some names to potentially be aware of. Sam Darnold, who we all, I think, can assume is not going to leave Minnesota. JJ McCarthy, again, a player I think either is not going to leave Minnesota, or if he is a guy. I mean, there's people talking about the Giants trading the number 3 overall pick for JJ McCarthy. Seahawks don't have the ammo to do that. So that's just another name. Nick Mullins is another name, 29-year-old backup quarterback. So McCown's got experience with those guys. But let's take a look, of who he played with. Last time he played was 2019. He was with the Eagles in 2019 as a backup. Carson Wentz, again, another connection to Carson Wentz. He was with the Jets from 2017 to 2018. That's another Sam Darnold connection. So interesting to see that. Let's see who else Josh McCown played with. He was with the Browns from 2015 to 2016. Who did he play with there? Johnny Manziel. Can you imagine if Johnny Manziel made a comeback? RG3, Charlie Whitehurst. These are some funny names. Cody Kessler. Yeah. I don't think we're at this point, those guys, I don't think are guys that are going to be playing. So, the probably logical connections, everyone's going to assume it's going to be a Sam Darnold. We'll see about that. It looks like, let me double check this, but I want to double check. It looks like we've got some of the first names rumored for the Seahawks. Here we go. Tom Pelissaro reports the Seahawks plan to interview Bears interim coach Thomas Brown. Interesting. For offensive coordinator. So we're going to take a look at Thomas Brown here right away. The Seahawks are scheduled to interview Lions offensive line coach Hank Fraley for their offensive line coach, for their offensive coordinator job Friday. 11-year veteran as an offensive line as a player. Haley has been instrumental in Detroit's run game, an area which the Seattle wants to improve. All right. Let's go. Let's talk about these guys. So Hank Fraley now becomes name number one. And let me new names now on HB Mornings. So Hank Fraley. Let's take a look for Hank Fraley and look at his background just so everyone can know. It's coming up with him as a player, not as a coach. All right, let me get his background somewhere else. Ooh, wow. Take a look at this dude. I got to share my screen so you guys can see what I'm seeing. Sorry, TikTok, you will not be able to see this. You can go over to YouTube if you'd like to see. Let's pick this guy. There it is. There it is. Pull this up. Whoa. Tell me you don't want... Tell me that guy wouldn't make a rugged offense. Really interesting to see who they're interviewing first. All right. So Hank Fraley, let me look at his background, man. Dude, I love the look of the guy. No doubt about that. So offensive line coach for San Diego, the college team, the college in 2012, San Jose State, 2013. Vikings assistant offensive line coach 2014 to 16, went to UCLA as an O-line coach 2017. Lions assistant offensive line coach 18 to 19, and then for the 2020 through now, he has been the offensive line coach. So let's do some connective work here with the Lions, and we're going to start with 2020 and work our way forward with Hank Fraley. So Chase Daniel keeps coming up in a lot of these places. I can't imagine the Seahawks are going to look at Chase Daniel. David Blau was a backup. Matt Stafford, I don't think he's going to be available. Obviously, Jared Goff, not available. Tim Boyle has come up in a few places. I don't think that's going to make sense. Real Hawk Talk chat is blowing up. So funny. Sorry. Yes, but Nate Sudfeld has come up in a couple of the other places I've looked. I just don't think these are realistic options. Who else? Let's see roster-wise. Let's look at the roster here for the Lions and who their quarterbacks have been. So Teddy Bridgewater, is it possible that he could be a name? Maybe. Hendon Hooker. That's an interesting name. Hendon Hooker, drafted by the Lions in the 3rd round in 2023, and is sitting behind Jared Goff. Hendon Hooker has a couple years left on his rookie deal. He will be 27 next year. That could absolutely be a guy that they look to trade for. Absolutely. Now, I don't know what the Lions would want for him. I don't know what the Seahawks would be willing to give for him. But he's the one of the only guys I would say maybe meets the qualifications of not just being a bridge, but he could potentially be your franchise guy. Don't know. We'd have to see. Yeah, Hendon Hooker had an injury that dropped him in that draft. There were some people that thought he was a first-round talent, but had an injury that kept him out. I think I could absolutely imagine a situation where if they hire Hank Fraley, that they work with John Schneider and say, okay, let's trade for Hendon Hooker. We're going to have Hendon Hooker and Sam Howell battle it out, and we're going to cut Geno Smith. I'm not advocating for these things. I'll tell you when I'm advocating, but I'm not. For now, I believe that that's a realistic scenario. And so I think that could absolutely be something that comes along with Hank Fraley. One of the other things that's really interesting about Hank Fraley is, talk about offensive lines. Is there an offensive line that you want more than the Detroit Lions offensive line? Let's take a look at the Detroit Lions draft history with Hank Fraley as their offensive line coach. Okay. So let's look at the offensive line draft history with Hank Fraley as the line coach. He's been there really since 2018 as an assistant line coach. So we'll go that far back, but really since 2020 is when he became, let's focus there, and then we'll look back at a little bit before then. So 2020, his first year as offensive line coach, they drafted Jonah Jackson in the 3rd round, who did go on to become a Pro Bowler. Logan Stenberg in the 4th round, who didn't do anything. That was their 2020 draft. 2021, they drafted Penei Sewell. Now that was number 7 overall, so you don't exactly get to just take a ton of credit for that, but he's one of the best tackles in football. So there's that. And then 2022, they did not draft an offensive lineman. 2023, they drafted Colby Swordsall in the 5th round. He's done nothing. Then in 2024, they drafted Giovanni Manu, who is this massive human who hasn't played at all yet, but is a very interesting prospect. And then they drafted Christian Mahogany in the 6th round. Christian Mahogany looked like one of the better rookie guards in the NFL, certainly better than the guard play the Seahawks got. And they got him in the 6th round. That's pretty appealing. If we go back to the first 2 years, 2018 was when he was an offensive line coach, assistant offensive line coach. They took Frank Ragnow with the 20th pick. Interesting, like to have somebody who's got experience with taking a center in the 1st round in the 20th pick is interesting to me. How much would he be advocating in the room for John Schneider to use some of his early picks on interior offensive linemen? Interesting. And then in 2019, they did not take any offensive linemen. But, you look at that team, that is the model. Like David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs and, Sam Laporta as a tight end and what they've done there as well. There's a lot to the way that team attacks defenses that I think is very much in line with how Mike Macdonald wants to run his offense. So really interesting name there for a lot of reasons. And, you don't know if what that would mean for Scott Huff. Maybe they would hit it off. Maybe, he's not going to be the OC and the offensive line coach. So maybe that's who he'd want to keep along, but you don't know that. So interesting name there. Let's talk about the other name. Really interesting. Thomas Brown. I have some thoughts on this, but let's take a look. Let's take a look at Thomas Brown's background. Thomas Brown is 38 years old, 5'8", 203. So this guy's he's built like me, man. He played for the Falcons and the Browns as a player. Was a running back back when he was a player. So again, run game. You're getting a pattern here. So he was running back coach for a number of years. He became the University of Miami's offensive coordinator in 2016 for a couple of years. Went back to being a running back coach to South Carolina, then went to the Rams in 2020 as a running back coach. Was assistant head coach and running back coach in 2021. That's interesting. Sean McVay hired this guy to be a running back. First NFL job was with Sean McVay. Elevated him to assistant head coach a year later, as well as being a tight ends coach. He then in 2023 was the OC for the Carolina Panthers. So this is the guy, if you don't know, that had the first year of Bryce Young. And so we'll talk about that. And then he became the Bears passing game coordinator this year, became the offensive coordinator, and then became the interim head coach. So there's going to be a lot of feelings about Thomas Brown, but if you look from a coaching perspective, there's a lot of breadcrumbs that lead to the impression that this guy might be a quality coach. So that's interesting. So let's go back and look at his time with the Rams first. I think this is going to probably bring up some interesting names. Let's look at the 2020 Los Angeles Rams. And the first thing we're going to find when we look at the 2020 Los Angeles Rams is that, Jared Goff, John Wolford. I don't think those are going to be the guys that he would bring with him. Obviously, Matt Stafford and John Wolford. I don't think either one of those guys are coming either. Would be interesting if he would want Andy Dickerson, who was just fired as the Browns offensive line coach, if he'd want to bring him back here. Wouldn't shock me. 2022, again, he had some Baker Mayfield experience, but Baker Mayfield's not going anywhere. So that's his Rams experience. And then we go to the Panthers again in 2023. Let's take a look at that Carolina Panthers team in 2023 a little bit more carefully. So they ranked 31st in the NFL in points scored and 32nd in the NFL in yards. Yikes. That was a really, really bad offense. Hard to say how much of it was the play caller versus the players. Obviously, the roster was really bad. But this is another guy that would have Andy Dalton ties. So maybe there's a chance that the Seahawks would be interested in bringing in and aging Andy Dalton as a bridge quarterback. But if you look at this year, so let's let's go ahead and look at the Chicago Bears this year. I mean, the Bears 28th in points scored, 32nd in yards. So not two particularly good offenses. Now, again, you can't put that all on Thomas Brown. I think you can't put almost any of it on him. But when did he start taking over as the offensive coordinator? So on November 12th, he was promoted to OC. So let's take a look at the Bears games from November 12th on. This was after their loss to the Patriots. So against the Packers, they scored 19 points. They immediately had 391 yards, and they had 179 yards rushing. So they did make a jump his first game against the Packers. Against the Vikings, 27 points, 400 yards of offense. It's interesting. Then against the Lions, his first 3 games, they should have won that game, or they had a real good chance to win that game against the Lions on Thanksgiving. They scored 20 points. They had 300 yards of offense, and were driving for what could have been the tying field goal or the win. Really struggled against the 49ers, 13 points, 162 yards of offense. Vikings, 12 points, 284 yards of offense. Lions again, 17 points, 382 yards of offense. The Seahawks game we know about. And then the final game against the Packers, 24 points, 224 yards of offense. So, it's an interesting name. I think we'll have to get some folks on that have some experience. Robert Mays is one of them. So we'll talk to Robert about him certainly on Monday. But Thomas Brown, interesting name. I'm going to say it because if you don't, someone else will say it. And I think it's a reality in the NFL. You never know, unfortunately, with NFL coaching vacancies, how much with the Rooney Rule, whether it's like what the Patriots are doing, that's such a thinly veiled, like it's not really that they're interested in these guys, they're just satisfying the Rooney Rule. Is Thomas Brown falling into that category? I don't know. I'm not meaning to disparage Thomas Brown. That's not my intent at all. But it's a little bit of a surprising name. And so we won't know until they've had the conversation how genuine their interest is. So I think that Thomas Brown's career is pretty interesting from a coaching perspective. You've got Sean McVay that's demonstrated interest in him. You've had Sean McVay elevate him to assistant head coach after one season. You've had the Panthers bring him in to be responsible for Bryce Young's rookie year. And if we look at that a little bit further, that was a Frank Reich hire. So Frank Reich was the coach that year. He brought in, so that's another coach kind of who respected Thomas Brown enough to make him the OC. And again, that also Frank Reich was responsible for that offense. So you can't put it all on Thomas Brown. I think Thomas Brown's an interesting name. I don't think it's terrible. I think people are going to freak out about it. I think that Caleb Williams was a real anchor around any offensive play caller's ability. We saw it in this game against the Seahawks, what he could and couldn't do. I think Bryce Young as a rookie was a absolute millstone around any play caller's neck. I don't think there was a lot you could do. So, yeah, I think that it would be really unfair to just dismiss Thomas Brown because of the way those offenses performed. I think that that's a reality of how some people are going to react given the two offenses that he was responsible for, I think you got to look past that a little bit. So we had our first two official names for the Seahawks, which is very cool. And then let's take a look at, I think there's a couple other names. Let's take a look at a couple other names that are not, these are just people that are being thrown out and people are guessing. All right. So David Shaw, this is kind of a crazy one to me. I don't know if I really see it, but it's been rumored enough that I'm going to talk to it. David Shaw was a Stanford coach for a long time. I really, and he's now with the Broncos as a personnel guy, not as a coach. But he was Jim Harbaugh's offensive coordinator at Stanford for 4 years before he became the head coach. Now, I'll put this out there. If David Shaw comes, is he going to bring Andrew Luck out of retirement? Probably not. But that would be an interesting name for sure. But he coached Andrew Luck. He's got experience with Andrew Luck. In 2006, in 2006, Shaw was the passing game coordinator and wide receivers coach for University of San Diego for Jim Harbaugh. So he's got another Harbaugh tie there. And then there's some rumors that he's going to be interviewed for head coaching jobs. But if we look at David Shaw and his background, I think what we will find is, Tanner McKee could be a connective guy, a backup for the Eagles. The last time he was a head coach was for Stanford in 2022. So if I look up the Stanford quarterbacks that were drafted, Tanner McKee, as I said, 2023. Davis Mills, 2021. It's another name potentially. Those are probably it. And then if you look at, he's with the Broncos now. So that's another potential Zach Wilson tie. Zach Wilson will be available this year or next year in the offseason, this offseason, I should say. So there's a possibility there. If we look, I think there's another name with the Broncos as a QB. Jarrett Stidham is a name that, has been a starter. Is he a guy that they could look at? I think it's possible. So those are a couple names for David Shaw if he were to come. One other name. We'll look at one more name, then we'll call it good. T. Martin is a guy that some people have talked about as a possible connection with the Seahawks. Former quarterback from Tennessee. He obviously has worked with Mike McDonald in Baltimore, so he's got experience. He was a play caller for USC from 2016 to 2019. Let's take a look and see where his coaching journey has taken him. So he has been wide receivers coach for the Ravens 2021 to 2022 and the quarterbacks coach from 2023 till now. So if we look at the Ravens, from 2021 on, and we look at, I don't think Lamar Jackson's coming anytime soon, but Tyler Huntley is a possible name to keep in mind. He was a backup there for a while. Anthony Brown is a guy that they drafted or that they had in 2022. He's not there now. Malik Cunningham. That's an interesting name. Obviously drafted in 2023. And Josh Johnson, too old. But yeah, so I don't know that there's any guys that T. Martin is connected with that really make a lot of sense. But those are the ones that kind of jump out for me. Yeah, I mean, Sam Darnold connection at USC is worth calling out, but again, I don't think Sam Darnold's going to be a real option for anybody. So we just went through. I just went through a bunch of different names. Went through the two guys that were announced. Thomas Brown. Went through Hank Fraley. I think everybody's a titter over Hank Fraley. You can't help but look at the Detroit Lions offense and want something like it. I think that I like how tough that seems. I have some questions about play calling and about maybe the vision there. Think about this for a second. Hank Fraley is your OC and is your run game expert. They keep Jake Peetz. And Jake Peetz is your Sean McVay based passing game coordinator. That could be a really cool marriage. If you get both of those guys together, that could be something really appealing. But I think you need a pretty high powered passing game coordinator in order to balance where Hank Fraley's strengths are. The other thing that's interesting with Hank Fraley, if that ends up working out, is he's got tight end background as a coach. I've told you that this is a strong tight end draft, and I think tight ends can absolutely help, not just in the passing game, but in the running game and in the blocking. So does that increase the odds that the Seahawks would potentially go get another tight end in this draft, which I think is likely anyway. Going to take a look, see if there's more reports coming out before we kind of wrap up too soon. But you're going to want to rewind, watch from the beginning. I go through just about every possible name for OC and quarterbacks who they might be connected with. A lot of people are reporting about Steve Spagnuolo getting some interviews, which he should. Albert Breer's reported the Seahawks are bringing in Hank Fraley. Hank Fraley's done groundwork and trying to find a pass game coordinator he'd pair with. So not sure if Jake Peetz would be part of that, but that's cool. That's cool. And talk about a guy that just fits, I think, the demeanor that I think a lot of people would get pretty excited about. That's the guy. I think he's an interesting name. Do not know what he would bring from a play calling perspective. I don't think that if it's 3rd and 1 or 3rd and 2, that the Seahawks would be last in the NFL in run percentage in those situations. I think that he is used to a head coach that goes for it on 4th down, and Mike McDonald secretly has been a 4th down aggressive coach. They just weren't good at it, so it didn't stand out very much, but he went for it quite a bit. So there could be a good pairing there. Certainly going to keep an open mind about that. All right, folks, I got to run. Appreciate everyone tuning in. If you haven't already given the show a like and click subscribe, please do. Really, really appreciate it. Head on over to jkboots.com. Use promo code HawkBlogger. Gets you 10% off. Gets you a chance to win this pair of Seahawks themed boots. You are going to want these. You're going to be the only person on the planet that will have these. And it'll take 6 to 8 weeks for them to hand make them custom for your feet. So I'm going to be making the decision about who gets these in the next couple of weeks. So use code HawkBlogger now. It won't be good forever to get 10% off, to get a chance to win those boots. I'm actually meeting with JK Boots tomorrow. My folks over there, we're going to figure out some of our next promotional stuff that we're going to do. But for now, this is a great opportunity that's ending soon. So make sure you take advantage of that. Make sure you join over at patreon.com/HawkBlogger. I've got all sorts of stuff coming up. I'm going to be heading to the Senior Bowl later this month. The Senior Bowl is getting stacked with really, really good players. I'm going to have interviews. I'm going to have content that some of it will be patron only. So patreon.com/HawkBlogger. You want to sign up there. And obviously be a YouTube member as well. Appreciate all the support. And if I'm glad Old School brought this up. I keep forgetting to mention this, but anyone that buys a pair of JK Boots automatically gets a chance to win. Let me get this, make sure I get the right one here. Anyone who buys a pair gets a chance to win a Ford Raptor. So use code HawkBlogger, get a chance to win the Seahawks boots. You also get a chance to win a Ford Raptor. So really, really cool, and a lot of good stuff there. So make sure you take advantage. But yeah, thanks for all the support. We will see you tomorrow with another episode of Hawk Blogger Mornings. We'll be back with Mike Sando, talk about all the stuff going on here, and appreciate all of you, supporting the show. Until next time, I'm Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all the places at Hawk Blogger. Make sure you give like, make sure you follow. This has been another episode of Hawk Blogger Morning.